and University Moscow, Russia. He has published two science articles. The first, Transformation of Indo-Russian Corporation in the Peaceful Use from Atomic Energy. The second, the development of nuclear energy in India, from the peaceful atom to nuclear weapons. We belong to the National Research University Higher School of Economics. The topics presented to us is the impact of the South Asian nuclear dilemma on the reconfiguration of the nuclear now, proliferation remain. Um, um, uh, Good morning, Professor. Can start with his presentation, please?
Yes, good evening here in Russian, Moscow. Muchas gracias, señora Suárez. Si puedo demostrar, sí, un momentito, presentación. Ahí. Can you see my presentation? Yeah?
Sí se ve la presentación. Muchas gracias.
May I start here? Okay.
You can start.
Thank you. Okay. Buenas tardes, queridos colegas. Me gustaría expresar mi profunda y sincera gratitud a los organizadores, especialmente señor Cabrera, Brian, por invitarme a participar en un congreso científico tan maravilloso del Club de Física Nuclear. Me siento realmente honrado de hablar en su congreso sobre este tema más importante y actual, en mi opinión, el impacto del dilema nuclear del sur de Asia en la reconfiguración del régimen de no proliferación nuclear. Dada la complejidad del tema y este vocabulario especial, me gustaría continuar en inglés con su permiso. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to express my deep and sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to participate in such wonderful scientific congress of the Nuclear Physics Club. My name is Andrei Dobritsin. I am the graduate from the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs, High School of Economics, University, Moscow, Russia. And today I would like to draw your attention to an extremely important and relevant topic of transformation of the nuclear non-proliferation regime based on the cases of India, Pakistan, and China and their relations in this strategic triangle. For the relevance of the research, it is determined by the systemic crisis in the nuclear non-proliferation regime today, caused by the enhancement, by strengthening of unofficial nuclear states, whose numerous regimes violations obviously contribute to the gradual decay, we can say so, of the NPT, or the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as its main guarantor, increasing the global nuclear threat. That's why we cannot really separate the new challenges to NPT regime from the role of its first main violators, India and Pakistan, to in the regime's gradual reconfiguration, the regime's transformation. India, in this regard, has been always driven by the security concerns coming from China and its nuclear ambitions, which launched this kind of domino effect, leading to the firstly security dilemma and forming subsequently the unsolvable nuclear dilemma in this strategic India-Pakistan-China triangle. With the emergence of nuclear factor and the active buildup of nuclear weapons to ensure nuclear deterrence, these controversies, these historical disputes between three states boosted the nuclear escalation in Asia, especially in South Asia, thus influencing not only the regional but also global security. The nuclear non-proliferation regime itself de facto approved, conceptualized, fixed, and finally codified the necessity to strive for global peace, for global security and stability in the nuclear weapons world, establishing the credible control over the proliferation of all the necessary nuclear elements, such as fissile material, uranium fuel equipment, and nuclear technologies that make it possible to develop, create, and test nuclear devices all over the world, and uniting the nations with a very simple but very important idea that nuclear energy should be used only for peaceful purposes, only for peaceful purposes. These fundamental humanistic principles which restrained the mankind from its own annihilation and established the universal dominance, the universal governance of international law, its superiority, restraining nations' permanent urge for conflict, maintained the regime relevant, and the use of atom rational for a long time. However, while it was evolving and coming through the stages of consolidation, the stages of stability, the new political, economic, security challenges also transformed, increasing the importance and superiority of national interests over the global ones. As a result, the regime, the NPT-based regime, facing its systematic crisis, was not able to adapt to new geopolitical reality and international strategic context, starting to fall apart gradually, thus decreasing the significance of the treaties, of international agreements, and organizations that kept it viable. These integral parts of the nuclear non-proliferation regime have been based not only on the profounding NPT treaty, accompanied by the UN Security Council, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and etc., but also on the crucially important nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament treaties, such as PTBT, Partial Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and for sure TPNW, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, along with the nuclear export control platforms such as NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group, and for sure the Nuclear Exporters Committee, also known as Zanger Committee. The main problem of the regime in this regard, in my opinion, is the interconnectedness and interdependence between its stability and this complicated, ramified network of these treaties and organizations. It means that any failure, any error, if we can say so, in any of the elements of the regime can destabilize the whole system, causing a destructive chain, domino reaction, undermining the regime internally. Taking this information into account, the tremendous difficulty of dealing with both internal and external geopolitical challenges, it seems to be impressive how the regime kept its stability, starting not even from the first nuclear test in Los Alamos, but from the first conceptual foundation of the attitudes to nuclear energy at its use in 1940s, 1950s. The obvious advantages, which proved the credibility of the NPT-based regime, we can name the fact that only nine, only nine nuclear states have obtained the nuclear weapons. Five of them, the P5 states, it is clear, became official nuclear weapon states, signing the NPT, and finally forming the basis of nuclear non-proliferation regime, while only four of them, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, became unofficial nuclear weapon states, or we can say second tier nuclear weapon states. This fact, on one hand, shows the necessity of keeping the regime viable and the humankind safer from this global threat of nuclear war. On the other hand, it doesn't consider the profound international changes in the system of international relations, which objectively force the elements of the regime, the NPT-based regime, transform and to adapt. For this reason, it is vitally important to define the major challenges, the major problems of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, analyze, reveal the reasons for their emergence and consequences which they leave. and absorb the potential analog mechanisms which could be able or would be able, probably or not, substitute the NPT as the main guarantor of the regime and increase the state's awareness, since understanding of the risks of nuclear proliferation. However, the total study of the regime's emergence, development, difficulties, and future perspectives cannot be successfully accomplished without focusing on the impact of its main and first violators, namely India and Pakistan, which by testing the nuclear weapons contributed to the active reconfiguration of the nuclear non-proliferation regime's mechanisms, revealing this NPT relevance partly and its inefficiency, increasing the significance of South Asia as a region with one of the highest risks of the nuclear escalation, probably. In this regard, China being the strategic trigger and key factor for controversies and conflicts in the India-Pakistan relations, initially also contributed to the regime's changes, creating the kind of domino effect by testing a nuclear bomb in 1964, which led to firstly India's nuclear test in 1974, Operation Smiling Buddha, and the 1998 test, Pokhran 2 test, and then Pakistan's test of nuclear weapons in 1998. That is why, in order to understand current situation with the nuclear non-proliferation regime, we should include the research of the impact of these three states, India, Pakistan, and China, on the regime's transformation by tracing the evolution of the approaches to the idea and norms of nuclear non-proliferation and by understanding how these actually regional confrontation, regional controversies, and the application to the nuclear deterrence strategies in this geostrategic India, Pakistan, China triangle might not only influence the balance of power in Asia, but the international relations in Asia, but also undermine global security and stability, eroding, destructing the main pillars, the main foundations of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, thus decreasing this kind of importance and significance, both the legal and international of the NPT, the control of the global proliferation of the nuclear material, technology, and devices all over the world. Though the nuclear non-proliferation regime, frankly speaking, is still widely examined by numerous experts, there is not much of a discourse about the collective, the cumulative impact of India, Pakistan, and China on the regime's change. The scientists tend to focus on the separate influence of each of these nations on the proliferation of nuclear weapons, or just view the general role of the nuclear escalation and nuclear deterrence caused by the actions, the violations of India, Pakistan, and partly China in the process of signing the NPT and the future formation of the NPT-based mechanisms. For this reason, I think there is a vital need to not to connect the evolution of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, starting from its conceptualizing with the development of the nuclear programs in India, Pakistan, and China, how their separate ways, how their separate attitudes to the nuclear weapons led to this cumulative common understanding of detrimental of these terrible consequences of the nuclear proliferation, thus fostering them for sure to cooperate in this field and objectively influencing the regime to change itself. That is why, yes, I consider this topic to be extremely relevant, especially today in this. As for the research question, you can see it was formed to estimate the impact of India, Pakistan, and China on systemic changes of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. As for the hypothesis, I suppose that despite the minor individual influence, the minor individual impact of India, Pakistan, and China on the NPT-based regime, on the nuclear non-proliferation regime, the total impact of their violations based on their unceasing nuclear buildup and resistance to the participation in the key regimes formats, key regimes mechanisms, contribute to the gradual deterioration, gradual decay of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, questioning the credibility, unfortunately, of the NPT. As for the main goal and So the main goal, I suppose, we can characterize as to evaluate the contribution of India, Pakistan, and China to this ongoing reorganization, reconfiguration of international NPT-based regime. And according to the stated goal, I would like to show you six objectives, that were formulated on this slide. First of all, to trace the historical evolution of NPT regime itself and the creation of NPT, the evolution of the approaches of India, Pakistan, and China to the NPT-based regime, and to explore the impact of NPT both on the civil nuclear energy development of India, Pakistan, and China, and on the nuclear deterrence strategies. Finally, concluding with the certain prospects of the NPT and its analog platforms and its substitution, if we can say so. As the plan and characterizes these goals, first of all, so we're going to talk about the historical part, tracing the formation of the NPT-based regime and India's, Pakistan, China's views on the regime itself. Yes, then we'll dwell on the influence of the regime's defragmentation on these three states' peaceful atom programs and strategies. And the main emphasis of the third part, let's make on the profound and grassroots challenges to the NPT and its possible new formats. So let's start for the historical. As a historical background, we should understand that no one would probably argue today that nuclear weapons have always posed a great danger for the humanity or the humankind. Firstly, it was considered as a tremendously disastrous tool, a powerful weapon that could be used both as a mechanism of attack to win in the military conflict and defense to ensure the deterrence effect. So the nuclear weapons, even before their final construction in 1940s and tests, caused numerous debates about the necessity of proliferation of these of such subtle, such difficult, complicated, and innovative technologies, particularly among the great powers. From a technological point of view, it seems to be clear that nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation of nuclear weapons includes all the measures taken to prevent spread of nuclear explosive devices, as well as the technologies, different materials, equipment to create them. Nuclear non-proliferation regime in this regard guarantees the provision of these measures with the help of international treaties, organizations, groups, different projects, aiming at regulating interactions between its participants and averting the acquisition or of the obtaining of the nuclear weapons by any state which didn't have them before 1967. Despite the fact that it could be declared that this idea of nuclear non-proliferation took its final conceptualized, formalized shape only after the creation and signing of the Treaty on the Nuclear on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT Treaty, on the 1st July 1968, the real and fundamental prerequisites for the formation of nuclear non-proliferation regime arose during the debates and during the discussions about the sharing of the nuclear technologies at the beginning of the Second World War. The main emphasis should be put on tracing the process of the nuclear non-proliferation regime's formation, starting from the first memorandums of the 1940s, calling for the establishment of international body with the total control over the proliferation itself of the nuclear technologies, materials, and weapons, and finishing the analysis with the final fixation, codification of the main principles within signing the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. A well-known Frisch Paris memorandum here in April 1940 was one of the first steps when it was realized that even with a small amount of uranium, 235, about probably 10 kilos, it was possible to create an atomic bomb of an incredibly disastrous power, capable of demolishing the center of a metropolis, probably. In one part of this report, there was a focus which would come true actually about the consequences of creating such a bomb, especially the nuclear arms race and development of nuclear deterrence strategies. While in the second part of this report, it was mentioned about the tangible opportunity of creating even a super bomb, yeah, and the reversible ramifications of concerning the scopes of further fallout and radiation spread from such a powerful weapon. The UK's understanding of this physical technological capability of constructing an atomic bomb in just a couple of years, according to the 1941 Mode Committee report, formed after the British Pearls Memorandum, opened the state two main opportunities how to deal with this information, creating two main attitudes. One was about the necessity to share the discovered results related to the atomic bomb's construction with their allies, so that it could be possible to win the war rapidly and put these weapons under the credible international control after the victory. Another approach was much more about the concealment of nuclear secrets, as it took into account the greater geopolitical picture, greater geopolitical implications of the atomic bomb, which could give its own a colossal international power and influence. At first, based on its national interest and great perspectives of this creating an atomic bomb, the government of the UK, headed by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, chose the second option, launching the Tupelo program in the framework of the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research and in cooperation with Canada. However, because of the lack of financial, technological resources and Nazi Germany's attacks within the Blitz bombing campaign against the UK in 1940-1941, Churchill understood the need of sharing the achieved nuclear results with the USA, whose territory didn't suffer from military attacks and whose economic levels, economic opportunities were much more significant at the time. This necessary cooperation, essential cooperation, led to the signing of US-UK Quebec Agreement in 1943, the Agreement of Declaration of Trust, and the Hyde Park Aid Memoir in 1944. All of which firstly integrated the Tupelois program in the US Project Y, the Manhattan Project, with a limited access of British physicists. Secondly, fixed the obligation not to use nuclear weapons against each other, not to share any of the nuclear related information, this certain information, to other states, and not to use these weapons against other without mutual consent. And thirdly, provided the two states with the actually monopoly, absolute monopoly on uranium and thorium reserves within their sovereign territories. Formally, it could be claimed that these first agreements were the initial, were the initial steps to the codification of nuclear non-proliferation norms, though in the bilateral form, firstly. These memorandums cumulatively laid the foundation initially for the Acheson-Lilienthal report, which offered to put fissile material and all the stages of a closed fuel cycle under the control of international agency. And then this Barrage Plan, which was initiated by the USA, the UK and Canada, rejected actually by the USSR mainly because of the fear for the establishment, for the creation of total Western nuclear monopoly, and suggested to get rid of all the nuclear arsenals, all the WMD, prohibiting further production of these weapons and providing permanent exchanges of the peaceful atom technologies among the state participants so that to guarantee control of the use of nuclear energy for only peaceful purposes. The next 2 decades in general were characterized by the permanent negotiations between the great powers, especially between the USA and the USSR, which used to generally compromise about the necessity to control the nuclear proliferation despite the geopolitical controversies, but had various visions how to ensure this control. In parallel with the development of Atoms for Peace project, the USA, for example, also intensified its production of nuclear weapons, prolonging the idea of NATO's multilateral nuclear forces, deploying US nuclear weapons in Europe to ensure the sufficient, in their opinion, level of nuclear containment against the USSR. These offensive measures faced the obvious opposition from the Soviet Union and lack of enthusiasm of NATO's allies, actually, especially France, which was actively developing its own atomic bomb in the second half of 1950s. The US escalation contributed to the deceleration of the negotiations themselves on the adoption of the statute of the future International Atomic Energy Agency. So it was kind of the main prerequisite, we can say, which itself had to deal with the states' controversies related to the formulation of IAEA safeguards in 1956. The main point of these disagreements was that the USA and the UK proposed a strict system of control over the agency's assistance provided to those states wishing to develop peaceful atom. Meanwhile, India, France, and for some time even the USSR supported the weakening of the terms of Article 12 of the International Atomic Energy's proposed statute, minimizing the control obligations for the recipient states predominantly. To adopt the statute and finish this final creation of the agency in 1957, the nuclear powers came to an intermediate compromise by proving to set the International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards on its peaceful nuclear sectors, linking the agency with the UN, obliging the agency to provide the UN Security Council with all the requested data, adding the clauses of the Article 3 about the provision of the control that all the supplied nuclear materials and nuclear equipment are used only for peaceful purposes, and about the adherence to the UN's course of reaching the global credible disarmament, global disarmament. Despite the fact that this statute entered into force and established the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1957, these modifications of the safeguard system only started to rise due to the non-acceptance of these safeguards by several developing states, headed by India, actually. That's why it's important and it's correlated with the strategic triangle of India, Pakistan, and China, that opposed the establishment. This group headed by India opposed the establishment of the control over its nuclear sectors, which would violate its right for independent and effective development of peaceful atom. Pakistan, Brazil, and others firstly also opposed the system, but later considered the pro-American lobbyism. As for the USSR, which had an obviously significant weight in the agency and initially supported India's protest, it changed its mind after the 1962 Caribbean crisis, followed by the beginning of a detente period in the relations with the USA, enhanced by the 1963 PTBT, and further treaties on disarmament, and also partly due to the concerns about the nuclear projects in Western Germany and in Japan at that time. Establishing the agency, International Atomic Energy Agency in 1957, and dealing with its safeguards formulations to the late 50s, first part of the 60s, the states finally came to the formalization of all nuclear non-proliferation norms, which could stabilize the world politics itself, managing the nuclear proliferation and decreasing nuclear escalation. The negotiations over the treaty, the proposed NPT, started with the 1958-1960s Irish resolutions to prevent the horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons and the further emergence of the nuclear states to maintain, to stabilize the international balance of power and contributing to the global disarmament issues. It is peculiar that the importance of integration of all the states without nuclear weapons, including India and Pakistan, into the non-proliferation regime was mainly ignored by the USA, but lobbied predominantly by the USSR and its support of the famously known 1961 Unden proposal made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Östen Undén, where there was a suggestion of how to convince non-nuclear weapons states not to obtain and produce nuclear facilities in military purposes, not permitting the deployment of nuclear weapons on their sovereign territories. The further formation of International Atomic Energy Agency, its nuclear safeguard system, along with these Irish resolutions, the Unden proposal, generated the formal conditions for 1966-1968 negotiations over the signing of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The NPT was approved, as you know, in the framework of the 18-nation Committee on Disarmament, also a very important body at that time, that year, ANCD, which consisted of Western and Eastern blocs, as well as 8 states led by India and Brazil. And it was opened for signature on the 1st of July in 1968. According to the treaty, nuclear weapon states became these countries which produced and tested their nuclear explosive devices before the 1st January 1967, de facto giving the total nuclear monopoly, total nuclear control to the nuclear weapons possessors, so P5 states, namely the USA, the UK, the USSR, and Russia, France, and China. The control of nuclear non-proliferation and verifications of the NPT's terms implementation in this regard were guaranteed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, obliging the nuclear states, participants of the regime itself of the treaty, not to transfer the technologies for the construction with the non-nuclear weapons states, whereas the states participants of the NPT without nuclear weapons were prohibited to produce nuclear facilities in military purposes or just to obtain them from the nuclear weapon states. So this was the kind of the first initial step for the further discrimination, as it's considered by India and partly by Pakistan, so by the second tier nuclear states. Yes, NPT, by finalizing the non-proliferation issues which have been discussed earlier, named by me, and elaborated for more than 2 decades, created the nuclear non-proliferation regimes whose guarantors became the P5 states. However, what was even more important in this regard, that despite nuclear disarmament and nuclear proliferation, negotiations and treaties, two superpowers, the USSR and the USA, were in the circumstances of Cold War, which made them continue an unceasing nuclear arms race and expand their geopolitical influence, so kind of unceasing nuclear buildup, we can say so. In 1960s, 1970s, the superpowers were competing for the Indian Ocean and for the Indian subcontinent as well, enhancing their nuclear capabilities in the region. It was a time when the USA tried to cooperate with India, both with India and Pakistan, to find the counterbalance against communist China, whose nuclear status and capacity could lead to their bigger regional and global ambitions for sure, undermining their in the future potential US influence. Whereas the USSR, the Soviet Union, was intensifying its military and technical cooperation with India, also trying to contain US impact on the country and on the region. With this containment idea in mind, the Soviet Union supported the Sri Lanka's proposal of making the Indian Ocean a peace zone, thus meeting the strict resistance from the USA and its allies, which obviously didn't consider stopping this kind of the construction of its military facilities on Diego Garcia Island. The same controversies were during the negotiations about the formation of nuclear-free zone in South Asia, as the strategic interests of these superpowers ramified. The USA supported Pakistani resolutions, while the USSR supported Indian initiatives, thus leading to the idea to a deadlock. These initiatives, even despite their failure, according to my research, showed the genuine superpowers' interests in this region, increasing its strategic importance. If we take into account the whole knot of Indian, Pakistan, and Indian Chinese contradictions in South Asia, it will be clear that the risk of full-scale regional conflict in the region is extremely high, especially after the emergence of nuclear factor, especially after 1974, namely. Due to the possession of the nuclear weapons by China, India, and Pakistan, it is highly likely that any conflict, if it arises, will become not only regional but global one, having these disastrous consequences for the world security and peace. Considering the paces, the development of economic, technological, geopolitical aspects and growth of China and India, along with the significant impact of Pakistan on the Islamic world, particularly the enhancement of nuclear control, nuclear non-proliferation mechanism in South Asia, it must be considered essential to prevent the further nuclear escalation and nuclear decrease and decrease the risk of this potential nuclear war if it arises. However, to implement such mechanisms in this region and to ensure this effectiveness, the credibility of international treaties and formats, and the increase of regional stability, regional security, the ways how India, Pakistan, and China view the nuclear non-proliferation regime should be observed attentively, in my opinion. In this regard, India, an unofficial nuclear state since 1998, that has significant ambitions and really tangible chances to become, along with China, the new superpower, still experiences irresolvable disputes, historical controversies with its neighbor Pakistan, and considers China as its main strategic competitor. Plays This aspect plays an extremely crucial role in the implementation of non-proliferation measures in South Asia. Even though India didn't sign any multilateral agreements on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, except for the 1963 PTBT, it still doesn't oppose the establishment of credible and fair nuclear non-proliferation regime, but only if it conforms states' national interests, particularly the idea of complete global disarmament. That is why it is entirely important to explore and comprehend the Indian specifics, its evolution of ideas, attitudes towards nuclear proliferation. Uh, these approaches, Indian approaches, evolved from Jawaharlal Nehru's initiatives of the necessity to eliminate all the nuclear weapons and focus on peaceful atom development, and up to the security necessity to defend its sovereignty, applying to the nuclear tests in 1974 and 1998. The tests led themselves to the imposition of sanctions, which India was able to lift only in 2008, yeah, after we can say the 34-year apartheid here, signing the nuclear deal with the USA, yeah, the 123 agreement, if we can say so. As for the Pakistan's attitude, one of the states really outraged by the fact that its direct regional adversary got such a unique international exclusion, which disbalanced not only the South Asian security order, but revealed the ineffectiveness of NPT mechanism as well, was Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Just like India, Pakistan has been an unofficial nuclear weapon state since its successful nuclear test in 1998 and hasn't joined the nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament treaties yet, except like India signing PTBT 1963. However, between India and Pakistan, there is a great difference in the approaches towards a nuclear non-proliferation regime. As Pakistan, nearly since the beginning of atom research in the country, followed the military interests, it was the necessity, particularly to achieve the nuclear deterrence against India. So the security concerns were really important at the time, weakening the nuclear asymmetry in this regard. In addition, Pakistan developing its approaches towards the Kashmir issues and to other nuclear issues, it had, yes, to consider the territorial issues like Jammu and Kashmir. It had to take into account religious aspects for sure, being the only Islamic nuclear weapon state in the world, and taking into account the controversies of its political regime. That also contributed to the enhancement of international society's concern about the excess of nuclear technologies and nuclear weapons given to radical Islamic forces. Some concerns are expressed by the global society today. Pakistan's position to NPT-based regime was based in this regard on conducting the reciprocal actions, rejecting also NPT, CTBT, and FMCT, signing the PTBT in 1963, as I had told you earlier, also proceeding from the territorial, religious, and political peculiarities. China. China, despite being official nuclear weapon state, due to its nuclear test in 1964, rejected the initial integration into the regime's platforms, nuclear non-proliferation regime's mechanism, developing its nuclear capabilities and postulating the necessity to defend its positions of developing states seeking to obtain nuclear facilities. However, after the collapse of the bipolar order in 1990s, China had to reconsider its position, signing NPT, CTBT, and joining the Nuclear Exporters Committee, thus obtaining all these kind of nuclear trade benefits, yes, joining the regime. In this regard, as you can see, the China's institutional the attitudes could be separated by the mainly two, three periods. The first period was related to 1950, 1970s. It was the Maoism period. 1950s, China got the bomb with the help of the USSR, the Soviet Union. After the, let's say, kind of the cordoning of the relations with the Soviet Union, with these disputes, also the territorial disputes. 1980s, 1990s, China started to integrate into the international nuclear non-proliferation mechanisms. That's why, yes, even despite there is such information that China was involved in illegal nuclear trade in 1980s, 1990s, in the second part of 1990s and 2000, there was a great attempt of China to reintegrate in the regime, and because of the fact that it tested nuclear bomb before 1967, in 1964, it had this chance, yes, this new chance to integrate in all the NPT-based mechanisms, yes, and gain all these all these benefits for nuclear peaceful atom program. For the consequences of ineffectiveness of NPT, of Non-Proliferation Treaty mechanism on nuclear peaceful atom programs of India, Pakistan, and China. On one hand, say that this was rather significant because it accelerated the paces of technological development, especially nuclear technological development of India, Pakistan, and partly China. On the other hand, it boosted their indigenous possibilities, seeking to reach technological autarky, thus focusing on their nuclear buildup. So we can say that this kind of ambiguity make this kind of nuclear dilemma even more the consequences, the ramifications of ineffectiveness on the NPT treaty, on the nuclear deterrence strategies, the story of a much more difficult story. As for the influence of this NPT ineffectiveness on the enhancement of nuclear deterrence strategies in India, Pakistan, and China, I could say that India it boosted India's minimum credible deterrence, especially forming the no first use principle, the necessity of forming this no first use principle, according to their approaches, according to the approaches starting from the Jawaharlal Nehru's and from these independence. As for Pakistan, it is much more of the full spectrum deterrence because it was lagging behind India for a long period of time in terms of technologies, especially nuclear technologies. First of all, is the conventional arms, the nuclear arms. So the unceasing nuclear buildup for sure is also extremely essential for Pakistan. That's why full spectrum deterrence. And China focus only on nuclear self-defense strategy, obtaining all the necessary nuclear facilities, uh, ensure this deterrence. Yes, having the Dongfeng nuclear missiles of the new generation, yes, being able to deter, yes, its sovereign territories, its security against all the adversaries, also India for sure. For the future of the NPT, what we can say here, in general, let's make focus on the estimation of the profound internal and external challenges to the NPT, demonstrating its incapability to adapt to new geopolitical realities. The lack of the liberation of the verification system, along with the restricted rights of the International Atomic Energy Agency, contributed to the further irrelevance of the NPT and the necessity to be modified. Also extremely important because the NPT, despite all of disadvantages, still is a kind of a very credible and the only mechanisms that integrates all the main P5 states. So yes, it has the controversies, yes, with the second-tier states, but the main owners of the nuclear facilities of nuclear weapons, yeah, the P5 states, the nuclear monopolies, yeah, the nuclear cartel, some say yes. We can name the states like this, but it is still a very credible mechanism. Yes, it has some irrelevant aspects. That is why it has to be modified. But if we try to create something new, like TPNW, yes, or make a stake on the CTBT, there would be a much more difficult ramifications and consequences that we cannot really forecast. That's why the stability, I think, is much more important than the modernity, than some kind of new aspects. But we can integrate some kind of aspects from PNNL, from JCPOA, from the global partnership into the system of the NPT. So yes, the changes are necessary, but the NPT should be maintained. See, the conclusions are presented in this slide. So we have analyzed this evolution of attitudes of India, Pakistan, and China, the evolution of the regime itself. Yes, how the NPT was made in general. We had understood the impact of the NPT relevance and ineffectiveness on the peaceful atom programs of India, Pakistan, and China, and on their nuclear deterrence strategies. Finally, yes, we have also analyzed, have discussed with you all the main challenges and prospects for the NPT. So thank you very much. I'm ready to answer all your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was an interesting topic about the impact of South Asian nuclear. Great. I have a question for you, please.
Yes,
What is your
yes.
experience working at HSE University?
Okay, muchas gracias para esta pregunta. Thank you very much. Yes, I've been working in the South Asian regional group. Our main focus was the analysis of the geopolitical, geoeconomic challenges to the South Asian security. It was extremely interesting and I think extremely fruitful cooperation. I'm not sure whether it is going to continue. Yeah, I'm now in the process of searching new challenges, if we can say so. That is why, anyway, I'd like to, for sure, thank all the main, some of my scientific supervisors, of the main rectorate of the High School of Economics and the faculty of Port Economy and International Affairs for extremely available experience. So I think, yes, it was a really fruitful cooperation.
Thank you. Very interesting. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta, por favor, para el doctor?
Hola Madeleine, por si acaso en el chat hay dos preguntas.
Ok. Dame un segundo. Ya. Ok. Ya. Bueno, la primera pregunta, bueno, agradece, ¿no? Thank you very much and congratulations for the presentation. What would you think if it exists about the development of nuclear weapons in Latin America?
Okay. As for the prospects of getting by any Latin American states nuclear weapons, I do not really believe in this because, yeah, for sure, I've been talking a little bit about this in my presentation about the historical moment. Yeah, remember about the Diego Garcia Island, about the nuclear facilities, yes, of the USA on this territory, and for sure, the geopolitical impact of the USA on Latin America states is extremely high. That is why, yes, I think the control here is really in their territory is really credible. As far as I know, yes, in 80s, in late 80s, yeah, there were attempts, particularly from Brazil, as far as I remember, to obtain the nuclear capabilities, but all of these states understood the disastrous ramification, the consequences of gaining the nuclear weapons, because not only of the let's say, yes, it could boost the instability in Latin America, the geopolitical instability, if one of the states, for example, Brazil, gained the nuclear states from one point of view. But from another, any state which would obtain the nuclear capability would be isolated, first of all. So it would be isolated from nuclear trade. We can say that the Indian example is rather great here, because 34-year apartheid, you can see 34-year isolation is really incredible. Yeah, for sure, Indians made a stake on their autocracy, on their indigenous facilities. But it was extremely difficult. It was extremely difficult not to cooperate and to get these essential nuclear facilities, equipment, material, uranium and etc. Because of the lack of the, for example, fuel in India itself. India has great reserves of thorium, but it cannot create only the thorium reactors. It is extremely expensive and it is extremely difficult from technological aspects. That's why it had to rely on the allies, and sometimes even it had to violate, for sure, this kind of isolation, cooperating also with Russia, a little bit with France and some other states, even with China for a couple of years, when it experienced the great technological problems on one of its NPPs. Yes, in this case, I think the example of India shows that no Latin American state would like to get into such a nuclear isolation, nuclear apartheid. That's why I don't really believe in this.
Thank you. Gracias, Paula, por tu pregunta. Another question is, given the current geopolitical and technological landscape, what do you foresee as the future of nuclear non-proliferation efforts in South Asia?
The future of the situation with nuclear non-proliferation in South Asia? Yes, this question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So about the future, I think it is rather vague. It is rather vague right now, but all the states, particularly India and Pakistan, are interconnected, extremely interconnected in terms of their um, regional controversies, because their regional controversies, regional territorial, particularly religious disputes, and especially the disputes in this geostrategic triangle of India, Pakistan, and China, makes this triangle and the South Asia kind of a powder keg. So this powder keg can easily explode, for sure, but without proper control. With the proper control of the P5 states, and I think with the partial integration of India and Pakistan into the regime, not probably into the NPT, because it is extremely impossible, I think, only if the treaty will be opened for resignature. But if it could be integrated, or if these states could be integrated in some other mechanisms, some other platforms of nuclear non-proliferation, and if India makes the first step, I think Pakistan would make this reciprocal activities, and the states would be the part of the system. And if they are the part of the system, the situation is much more stable. I hope that this could happen, but I'm not sure, because we can see now that in every region, unfortunately, the national interests prevail. Yes, they have the superiority over the international issues, especially the issues of international law. That is a problem, because we have this geopolitical chaos only after not only the regulation of the territorial and religious, if it is possible, the territorial and religious issues between Pakistan and China, but I don't think it is really possible in the near future. But in the long-term period, I'm not sure. Even if all the disputes are regulated, I'm not sure that this nuclear escalation will diminish or will decrease. only with the regulation of this geopolitical chaos, only with the regulation of the Ukrainian conflict or the situation with the sanctions, only after the regulation of international problems, we could talk about the regulation of the situation in South Asia and with the nuclear non-proliferation regime.
Thank you. Another question, please. What are the main factors contributing to the perceived decay of the NPT as an effective non-proliferation mechanism?
So why is NPT ineffective? Yes, the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
NEPT.
NPT and PTBT?
As
What?
an effective non-proliferation mechanism.
Okay.
Sí.
Yes. So what we can say here, NPT could be effective, but it experiences too much of the irrelevant pillars. Relevant pillars, especially related to the rights given to the International Atomic Energy Agency in terms of verification and inspection systems. Because I think if the mandate of the International Atomic Energy Agency could be expanded, the situation could be changed, and especially only after the beginning of the direct dialogue among the P5 states. Yes, when China, Russia, the USA, the UK, and France start talking to each other, and without this kind of the new geopolitical agenda, really focusing on the main agenda of the nuclear non-proliferation, without this politicization of the agenda of the NPT, CTBT, and other formats, without this politicization of the International Atomic Energy and NPT particularly, there could be some prospects. But now, because of this really chaos, I'm not sure how to characterize the current situation. When the conflicts will be regulated or the situation will be clarified about the future of these conflicts that now arise in every part of the world, especially yes in Eastern Europe. I think yes, the NPT could be modernized, but it shouldn't be substituted, because the substitution of the NPT could leave such disastrous and unknown consequences for the global society that I'm really afraid of. Because of this unknown future, I think we should make a stake on the credibility and the stability of the body of the NPT that guaranteed that guaranteed the nuclear non-proliferation in general. Yes, there were 4 cases of violations, but only 4. From 1968, only 4 cases of violation. I think, yes, we can walk in this direction, and we can make really significant changes if we modernize the NPT, but not substitute the NPT. I cannot hear you, unfortunately, the micro.
Sorry. Could you please provide us with your email so we can contact you?
Yes,
on the
in the
chat,
chat,
please?
yes? Okay, for sure.
Thank you so much, Professor. Until another opportunity. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Hasta pronto.
Thank you. Goodbye.